Okay, Jan, thanks for having us in your studio today on this lovely Canberra spring day. It's beautiful. Now I want to talk about the Icarus series. I mean, why Icarus? What is it about his story that attracts you?
Oh, I've always liked Greek myths ever since I was a small child. Mother gave me a big book of Greek myths. The whole idea of a bird, I don't know, it's just the paintings, so the Bruegel painting with the man mowing and the skull and the thing, and over in the corners this little man disappearing into the water. And, you know, it just always intrigued me.
Yes, so it's a great painting. It kind of depicts the ordinariness of everyday life going on while this extraordinary event took place, and in fact his splash was barely noticed. Does it sometimes feel like that to be an artist?
Feels like that all the time.
It's often told as a cautionary tale against being over-ambitious, but the reality is that Icarus simply enjoyed the moment too much. Is this really a failure, or is it just human nature?
I think it's just human nature, and particularly in Canberra. I think it's a pretty good place for people who are over-ambitious and come down splat.
That's right. Well, in fact, it's the middle way, isn't it? It's the ultimate nanny state parable. I mean, don't go too close to the sea, don't go too close to the sun. Stay in the middle lane.
Well, the middle way is dull. I would applaud the people who actually try, even if they do come down. People get old and bitter, unless they're lucky, you know. Look around at the number of high achievers who are sort of pretty miserable in their old age. It's just part of life.
Exactly. And many people know you're bird sculptors, obviously, and read a lot of human traits into these. Do you see Icarus as a logical extension of that work, or something quite different?
Well, if you know your anatomy, and I went through art school at the stage when I had to know every muscle, you know, by name, and ask a model to wiggle it, and the model had to know them too. This was the English way of training you. I'm not English, I'm Australian, but I trained in England. And once you're hooked on anatomy, anything that has a backbone has the same anatomy. The bird has exactly the same anatomy, the same muscles as we have. They're modified in the case of the keel and things like that, but you're still dealing with the same thing. So to move through that sort of line of anything with the backbone is something you do imperceptibly.
Mm.
I mean, we make a distinction that we're so much more superior to animals or birds. I don't think we really are. I think we just function on different levels.
Well, your birds often seem more like people than people do. I guess it's logical that Icarus just follows on from that.
Yeah, Icarus is just an extension.
Yeah.
Half bird, half human.
Exactly.
I think humans take themselves far too seriously.
Generally, yeah. There are 4 figures in the Icarus series. Can you tell us a little bit about each one and how they're different and why they're different?
No, they didn't all come together. They grew up separately, like a family almost. And Mum out the end, who's been there, seen it all, has turned her back on the whole thing. No, they didn't get made as a group. There are all sorts of other Icaruses hanging around the house, and there's probably hundreds of Icarus drawings going on, tucked under things and in amongst things.
But they each express something a little bit different about that story and the person, the parable, if you like. I mean, is there something particular about each of those that...
Not really, it's just, they're just different aspects of human birds.
Okay.
Okay. And Jane, we know that the models were made at the Canberra School of Art in the sculpture workshop.
Well, not the models.
Sorry, the clay figures.
Yeah, the big ones.
Yes, the big clay figures.
Scaled up. Yeah.
Scaled up at the Canberra School of Art. What was it like for you to work there again, having been a teacher there for so long?
Well, I left sculpture in 1980, so it was a fair gap, and went up to foundation. Yeah, it was very nice, really. I was in dread of the whole thing. I would have done anything to avoid it or get out of it or go overseas or Antarctica or anything to get out of it. I was dreading the whole thing, but thanks to Nick and Wendy, it all went off. We just had a ball.
And there was a really, it was really interesting the way the students kind of watched and saw the process of you making these pieces as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, and ate the muffins with us finally. Yeah.
Muffins. Excellent, excellent. Can you talk about the people that were involved in the process, and the Meridian people, for example, from the foundry?
Well, it was basically Robert Sinclair, who runs Meridian. Peter Morley owns Meridian, and Peter does all the patinaing, putting all the colour on the bronzes. I've been worrying myself sick about how he's managing with these huge things. I mean, it's all done with chemicals and oxyacetylene, and, you know, they're rather big. On the other hand, they've just done that war memorial for Palestine, the Palestinian one, not so long ago, so they've just done a big one. So there was Robert. Robert came out of the art school. He was, I think, head technician in ceramics.
In Canberra?
Yeah, in the art school.
Yeah.
Before it became the ANU art school. And Nick, without Nick, we wouldn't have existed, because Nick ran the forklift. And Nick, you know, all day, Nick, can I go up? Nick, can I come down? Nick, can I get out? And never a growl. It just, you know, just come and back the thing up.
And he's, of course, permanently on the staff at the
he's
sculpture
the
workshop.
head technician from the sculpture workshop. Darian Pullen from Meridian lived for a long time behind Ante, just down the hill here. So Alec Line, Darian and Alec were the first two. There were two at any time.
So they were coming up from Melbourne,
flying up
working
from Melbourne,
with you.
working for a week and then going back. Darian, after that, Rodney Broad, and Ed Nicolaides, it's a lovely name, Josh Rowell, and finally Gareth Morley, who came up, because Gareth will become the boss. So Gareth wanted to come and play too, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, we had a ball. Nothing went wrong, touch wood. And
Can you talk about that process of making those clay figures?
Well, one of them the boys worked on almost entirely, and I stood around and said, no, put more on there or take more off here, or took a knife to it and cut some off. The others, they put on the bulk of the clay. They scaled them up. They scaled up the armatures.
Yes.
And blocked them out with plaster and hessian, and then put on a coat of clay, and then I took over from there. And in a couple of cases they sort of finished them, and then I undid them and started off again.
To sort of fine-tune the personalities of the figures, or...?
Very difficult, because I could only work basically from the waist up or the ankles down, so somebody had to deal with the bit between the ankles and the knees, basically, because there was no way I could. It was too low for the forklift and too high for sitting on the ground. We just sort of worked it out between us. We worked the system out, and they did what they did, and I stood around and said, no, yes, more here, less there.
What about the complexity of the scaling up process?
Well, they're very professional. They do this, apparently they say they can scale up. Well, there's a drawing here, this one, that drawing. If I were to give that to, at that level to them, they would scale that up to whatever size. I don't know if you looked at that bubble thing last night, did you, about Hurst?
No.
And the team he has scaling things up.
Oh, that's right, yeah. It's massive.
Okay.
Cast of thousands.
Yeah, so the boys are very, very skilled at this, at scaling up mathematically, and you'll see in those little figures inside, they're all marked off, round in circles, 4-inch levels.
Yes.
Because it's a 4-inch, 4-inch.
But ultimately, scaling up ends up being more than just making them bigger. I mean, the dynamics and the proportions.
Oh yes, you have to.
All change, and is that where you felt that was your main role in kind of adjusting those to?
No, I think that my main role was to get on making the things along with the others.
Okay.
And they fetched and carried and measured and bulked up, and then I unbulked, and then they bulked up again, and we just had a ball.
And after the clay, can you talk about the process then that happened, and what happened with the moulds, for example?
Well, after the clay, they decided where the where the mould lines would go. I haven't got anything I can really show you. This would have had a shim all the way up here and was made in 2 pieces. It was crazy. I should have done that differently. But that was made in 2 pieces, which means I put shim brass. That gets stuck in the clay.
Yes.
It sticks out like that.
Yes.
And then I would put plaster on. They didn't put plaster on, they put rubber. So they painted rubber up to the shim everywhere. And after they put the rubber on, they then keyed it against the shim by using a drilling holes all the way around. And then they put the plaster on. And then they brought the plaster up to the shim line, up to the top of the shim. And then a whole lot of reinforcing, vertical reinforcing, steel reinforcing, so that when you tried to open it, it didn't just smash, because you're opening it against steel. And then they undid it all, and they took out the clay, and then they took out the rubber, and cleaned the rubbers, and then stuck it all together again, and moved it down to Melbourne.
Okay.
Used the plaster shells with the rubber inside.
So that concluded the Canberra leg
Yeah.
of the making, and now everything's down.
Well,
in
when it
Meridian.
went down to Melbourne, they painted in the wax into the rubbers, and then undid it again, took away the plaster, took away the rubber, and left you with wax. But they didn't put the waxes, together, because they'd be too big, so they'd cast each wax slab. The bottom of one of those figures from about there down would be in 2 pieces, front and back. And I think mostly the tops were in a front, and because of the wings, 2 sides and a middle in between the wings.
Okay.
So there would have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces, and then they've all got to be welded together. So you've got, once I growled to Peter and said, that wasn't what I wanted. He said, look, just forget it. You've got a new sculpture, just get used to it.
Yeah. And you've had a long association with Peter Morley, haven't you?
Yeah. I gave him his first job when he got off the boat.
When did you get off the boat, Jan? Do you remember?
It must have been around 1970s somewhere. He and Bill Payne had gone through Cardiff, I think, Welsh Art School. Decided that there wasn't any future in being sculptors. You can find it pretty soon in London whether you're going to make it or not, because you've got such competition up against you. They decided they'd go in for some other aspect of it. They started Meridian Foundry. They used to cast Barbara Hepworth stuff, but it got too big and very stressful. And they said, well, let's quit, let's go elsewhere, let's sell it and go. And I got off at Melbourne at the same stage when a man called Lemon down there was casting. And I'd been casting with, I can't think of his name, Tasmanian man, but he operated out of Arcadia, north of Hornsby. And also with Transfield. Transfield had been doing my casting for me. But I wrote to Mr. Lemon and said, I got this small sculpture, I'd like it cast, What can you do? He said, well, if I like to wait about 18 months in the queue, and, happy to cast it. He said, this young bloke had just got off the ship and he'd do it next week if I liked. So I sent it down.
Peter was the young bloke.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the first big job was the kangaroos in Commonwealth Park.
Yes.
And that was a riot. There's a film of that, I think. And they practiced for hours of running up sacks of sand and things so they could, pour the bronze and get it in. But it all worked out all right.
Excellent. Now, when the figures are finally finished, and it won't be too long, they're going to be installed in Canberra, in Petrie Plaza.
And Meridian will do that.
A Meridian will be doing
That's
that.
right, isn't it?
That's right. And I think they're being installed on your husband Des's birthday, is that right?
If things go to plan,
16th of December. Rather nice.
Yeah.
Maybe Des thinks you'll have done it for him.
No, he knows better.
And of course the the big question is how they're going to be positioned, how these figures are going to relate to each other. Now I know you're still in the process of working through that. What are your thoughts at the moment as to what are the important aspects of placement?
Well, I'm turning them out and everybody else turns them in. I want them looking out. Everybody else wants them looking in and talking to one another. I want them out and looking. I don't want them in a huddle. I want them spread. We'll see.
Does that give them an individuality, do you think?
I think so.
Okay.
Robert says don't worry that they'll bring them up. They'll have the stainless steel rods screwed into the bottom. He said they'll put them on the plinth and we can push them around, and when we're happy then they'll move them and drop the rods down the hole. I think whatever we do I'll regret it in 6 months' time and wish I'd done it another way, but I mean that's just part of life.
The problem is there's too many different ways of doing it.
Yeah, well I'm nervous at the moment after what happened the weekend. It's a bit nerve-wracking. And if you think of what happened with those pairs that were down at the ANU, got pulled over with chains and yits, I think 3 or 4 times before they had to be shifted finally to the ANG.
I'm sure people will love them, Jan. They'll learn to become a part of the city.
Doesn't stop people from the 1 or 2 from
no, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Seeing them as a challenge to pull over.
We look forward to seeing them in situ. I think they'll be marvellous. And
well, I hope.
It's been a great process working with you.
It's been a great... Actually, the whole thing has been... As you know, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't want to know about it. I just wanted to, stay in here, get on with my own thing and not know. You two, both beavers, have done an extraordinary job.
Oh, thank you.
And everybody else, the goodwill that's been around has been absolutely fantastic.
It's all about respect for you and your work, Jan, so I think that's
I don't know what it was,
really
but it's been a miracle.
Thank you.
It's been really good.
That's been wonderful. Thanks, Jan.
Can I go now?
I hope you got that bit.
Well, I just enjoyed it. It was just a pleasure to get my hands into something and not fiddle. I came back in here and I'm fiddling around with all these sort of things. Don't want to know. So that's why this, you see, because this is simple.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
So, and you can make what you like out of that.
Exactly.
Terrific.